across a wounded man lying unconscious on the ground. His clothes were torn and filled with stains of blood. My friend Denise checked his pulse to make sure that he was still alive. She was reluctant to come close at first. His facial features were very distinct. His eyes were set deep, and his mouth was pale and dry. He had long, scruffy hair, and his brows were quite thick. His nose was noticeably long, and his ears were wide. His pulse was weak, but he was still alive. We decided to carry him back to the camp and aid him. Not all of us agreed in bringing the unconscious man with us. The girls, Beth and Denise, felt unsure about this stranger, but James and I simply couldn't leave a helpless person behind. We were in the wild, and he would be an easy target for predators because of his condition. We laid him inside one of our tents and was about to tend to his wounds when he finally woke up. He didn't want to burden us any further and refused to be aided. He said that he only needed some rest to regain his strength. We asked what happened to him, and it was then when things got really strange. The man claimed that he was attacked by an unknown beast. He said that it was covered in white fur and had horns akin to that of a goat's. However, it stood and walked with 2 feet like a human. While he was about to be killed, someone tried to shoot it down. Luckily for him, the beast left and chased after the shooter instead. Before the man could elaborate his story, James and the girls couldn't help not to laugh about the creature that he just described. James apologized but began to explain anyway. He said that it would have been a terrifying story if he used a half-beast like a werewolf or a centaur, but a Goatman simply sounded too comical and funny. Beth and Denise also couldn't take the man's story seriously, and they laughed even harder when James said that it would have left him alone if he had given it a handful of grass. I kicked them out of the tent and apologized for my friend's behavior, but I couldn't blame them. I also thought that the man's story was too far-fetched regardless of what kind of half-beast he used to fabricate it. When the night came, I stayed with James and let the man use my tent so he could rest. Whether he was telling the truth or not, he was clearly hurt and needed some help. Few hours after I went to sleep, James and I jolted awake when we heard some screams. We rushed out of the tent to check on the girls, and we saw them holding a pepper spray in front of the wounded man who was coughing all his gas out. We asked them what happened, and they said that they saw the man's shadow lurking around their tent while they were sleeping. Thinking that he was about to attack them, Denise screamed and Beth pulled out her pepper spray. The man desperately tried to explain while he was wiping off his tears and catching his breath. He claimed that he heard a noise coming from the bushes, and so he went out to check what it was. He said that he stood close to the girls' tent to protect them. I didn't know who to believe since both of them could be telling the truth. The girls wanted to kick the man out of our camp, but he was still far from well. They also jumped to a conclusion before he did anything evidently foul, and they pepper sprayed him before he could even explain. We wanted to be fair, and so James and I had decided to watch over the girls and allow the man to stay for the night as well. I was supposed to ask the man to leave on the following day, but when I heard him groaning in pain inside the tent, I decided to leave him be and let him rest for a little while as me and my friends went for a hike. We continued the trail where we rescued the man, and after a couple of hours, we were all shocked by what we discovered next. The girls covered their mouths with both hands to hold in their screams, and I almost puked when I saw it. Just like what the man told us in his story, we came across another body in the woods. He had a rifle in his hand. Unfortunately, he was already dead. His head was crushed beyond recognition. His limbs were pulled off, and his chest was torn to shreds. He was killed so brutally that it was hard to think what attacked him exactly. Not even a bear would go so far, and neither would any predator in the forest. James and I looked at each other since we knew right there and then that we were thinking the same thing. There was something else out there in the forest, and we were all in danger for being out in the open. None of us wanted to say it out loud, but we were starting to think that the wounded man in our camp was actually telling the truth. We were far from anyone's reach, and we couldn't get any reception at all. We were all on our own in the forest, and we couldn't call for help. We cautiously headed back. After knowing that something so dangerous was lurking in the woods, it was extremely hard not to panic. I was so jumpy that every sound around me was making me turn my head. With every rustling of the leaves and the critters passing by, my heart was skipping a beat as I desperately tried not to scream. James and I needed to keep our senses in check since we had to look after the girls who were already crying in fear. James took the rifle from the body we had found so we could at least have a fighting chance if ever we were attacked. Unfortunately, Denise finally had lost it when a fox suddenly jumped out of the bushes and startled her. She screamed at the top of her lungs and ran off. We immediately went after her, but she was so freaked out that she just kept on running without looking back. We went far off the trail. Eventually, Denise was stopped on her tracks when she plunged in a ditch and fractured her ankle. We were lost in the woods, and Denise's injury significantly slowed us down. As we were trying to find our way back to the trail, we came across a small cabin. We headed towards it in hopes that someone was around. Unfortunately, there was nobody inside. We decided to rest there for a bit to calm our senses and wrap Denise's broken ankle. While Beth was tending to her injury, I looked around and discovered that the owner of the cabin was the dead hunter that we found in the woods. Aside from the matching clothes and the same rifle rounds on his shelf, I also saw something that immediately sent shivers down my spine. There were a few photos pinned on his board. The shots were taken from afar, and the pictures were blurry. However, they were enough to distinguish the figure of what he was trying to capture. They were images of an unidentified horned creature standing upright. The joints on the legs resembled a goat's, and so did the twisted horns. Apparently, this hunter was specifically hunting an unknown animal that matched the descriptions of a Goatman, and this idea was proven further when James told me that the rounds of the rifle were made of silver. After realizing that there was indeed a Goatman in the woods, our fears were heightened even further for obvious reasons. We were all reluctant to come out of the cabin, and we had to make it back to the camp and head out of the woods before the sun sets. We would have no chance of surviving if we hiked during the dark. James took more silver bullets from the hunter's stash, and we headed back out. I carried Denise on my back so we could move faster, but luck was simply not on our side. It took a long time before we found our way back to the trail, and the sun was about to set when we finally arrived at the camp. As the others hurriedly packed their stuff into their bags, I checked on the wounded man to tell him everything that we saw. However, the man was not inside the tent. Little by little, things began to add up. When I finally figured it out, it was already too late. The skies went dark, and we heard the surrounding shrubs rustle from one side to the other. The wounded man that we brought back to the camp was none other than the Goatman himself. The wounds that he refused to show us were gunshots that he took from the hunter that he killed. However, the damages were not enough to kill him, and he just passed out because of the pain. I should have listened to the girl's intuition, but it was already too late. When I turned around to tell my friends what I just realized, a bipedal beast covered in white fur with coiled horns suddenly sprung out from the shrubs and snatched Denise from where she stood. He moved so fast that he was already gone before James could even react. Profoundly terrified, Beth broke down on her knees and shrieked as James and I went after them. This vile creature dragged Denise across the forest ground. If it wasn't for her screams, we wouldn't have known which direction to go. He was simply too fast, and the darkness made it even harder to find his tracks. We kept on calling out her name so we could know exactly where she was since we couldn't see them. A few moments later, we finally caught up with them. Denise was desperately clinging onto a tree by wrapping both of her legs and arms around the trunk while the Goatman was aggressively pulling her by her hair. James immediately took aim and fired a shot. Unfortunately, he only got him on his legs. The wound slowed him down, but he was far from dead. He let go of Denise and charged towards James instead. Despite of his injury, he was still incredibly agile. He was able to dodge the rest of the shots until James was out of rounds, and he knocked him off the ground when he was already within his reach. The beast was so strong that James's head already began to bleed after a single attack. He was laid flat on the ground, and he lost the rifle. I knew that the Goatman would immediately try to finish him off, so I sprinted towards him as fast as I could. I jumped on his back and locked my arms around his neck as he was pouncing his way through James's defense. He then ran towards a tree and slammed me against it. I could feel a couple of my ribs breaking, but I tried to hold on for as long as I could. He slammed his back against the trunk once again, and I started puking out blood. My sight went hazy and I struggled to breathe. My strength was completely drained and I lost my grip. I could see the beast standing right in front of me with both his hands clamped together over his head. He was about to smash my brains out, and then I heard a gunshot. The Goatman received a fatal shot on the chest, and another one close to his throat. The third shot missed, but I could tell that whoever was shooting him was trying to aim for the head. Fortunately, the 2 shots he received were more than enough to bring him down. I saw Denise and James laying on the ground. When I sat back up, I realized that it was Beth who was holding the rifle. She ran after us and arrived just in the nick of time. As the Goatman cast his last breath, he gradually transformed into a human once again. Beth fired another shot right on his head just to make sure that he was dead for good, and we went back to the camp and called it a night.